August 15th, 1987. Cheyenne Frontier Days. Hank Morrison had drawn Devil's Thunder in the championship round, the black stallion that had never been ridden. That had put 17 cowboys in the hospital. Hank's younger brother Danny stood at the chute gate, checking the rigging one last time. 8 seconds, Hank, then we're both legends. The gate flew open. Devil's Thunder exploded into the arena like bottled lightning. But something went wrong with the rigging. Danny got tangled, dragged, trampled. Hank held his dying brother in the dirt while 20,000 people watched in silence. What Hank never told anyone was what Danny whispered in those final moments. Words that would haunt him for 35 years. Words that explained why Devil's Thunder was standing in his pasture right now, very much alive. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Hank Morrison's weathered hands trembled as he gripped the porch railing, his knuckles white against the splintered wood. 35 years of guilt and whiskey hadn't prepared him for this moment. The black stallion stood 50 yards away in his dying pasture, steam rising from its nostrils in the Wyoming morning chill. Devil's Thunder. Impossible. But those eyes, those same hellfire eyes that had watched Danny die, burned with recognition. The horse pawed the ground once, deliberately, sending up a cloud of dust, a challenge, or a greeting from the grave. Hank's hand instinctively moved to the Colt, .45 holstered at his hip. He'd carried it every day since the accident, though he'd never been sure if it was for protection or for the moment he'd finally find the courage to use it on himself. Now, staring at the ghost that had destroyed everything, he knew which it would be. Easy, boy. His voice cracked like old leather. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was talking to a horse that should have been bones and dust decades ago. The sanctuary around him was a monument to his failures. Broken fence posts leaned at drunken angles. The barn roof had more holes than shingles. 3 remaining rescue horses huddled in the far corner of the property, their ribs showing through patchy coats. Hank could barely afford to feed them, let alone himself. The bank notices stuffed in his kitchen drawer gave him maybe 2 months before they came for the land. But none of that mattered now. Devil's Thunder took a step forward, and Hank's breath caught. The stallion moved with the same predatory grace, muscles rippling beneath that midnight coat. How many times had he seen this exact movement in his nightmares? How many bottles had he emptied trying to forget the sound of Danny's ribs cracking under those hooves? The wind shifted, carrying the scent of hay and horse sweat, and suddenly Hank was 29 again, standing outside the chute in Cheyenne. Danny's voice echoed across the years. "Promise me something, Hank. If anything happens to me, don't let them put Thunder down. He's not evil, just broken. Like us." Those were the words Danny had whispered as he died. The secret Hank had carried like a stone in his chest. Everyone assumed Danny's final moments were spent on goodbyes or love for family. Instead, he'd used his last breath to save the horse that killed him. And somehow, impossibly, Hank had kept that promise without even knowing it. A truck engine rumbled up the gravel drive, and Hank's jaw tightened. Only one person had the key to his gate. He'd given it to her 8 years ago during one of his sober moments. Back when he still believed in redemption, she'd used it exactly twice, both times to tell him what a disappointment he was. The red pickup crested the hill, and Sarah Morrison stepped out like she owned the place. Maybe she did. At 37, she had her mother's steel spine and her grandfather's calculating eyes. She'd built a veterinary practice in Sheridan from nothing, married a good man, raised 2 kids Hank had never met. Everything he should have done after Danny died, she'd accomplished despite him. "Hello, Daddy." The word dripped with venom. She walked toward him with measured steps, never taking her eyes off Devil's Thunder. "I see you've met our old friend, Sarah." Hank's throat felt like sandpaper. "How long? How long have I been keeping him alive?" She smiled, but it held no warmth. "Since 1987, the day you walked out on Mom and me to crawl into a bottle." The pieces clicked into place like rounds sliding into a chamber. The mysterious buyer who'd purchased Devil's Thunder from the rodeo company before they could put him down. The private ranch in Colorado where he'd supposedly lived out his days. The death certificate Hank had seen in a horse magazine 5 years later. All lies. All orchestrated by a 12-year-old girl who'd lost her father the same day her uncle died. "You were just a kid," Hank whispered. "I was your daughter." Sarah's voice cracked for just a moment, revealing the hurt beneath the anger. "And I watched my hero become a drunk who cared more about his guilt than his family." Devil's Thunder snorted and shook his massive head, as if impatient with their reunion. The stallion's attention fixed on Hank with laser intensity, and for a moment man and beast regarded each other across 3 decades of pain. "Why now?" Hank asked. Sarah's smile returned, cold as a Wyoming winter. "Because you're finally going to do what you should have done 35 years ago. You're going to ride him, Daddy. 8 seconds, just like Uncle Danny said. And this time, you're going to finish what you started." She pulled a rope halter from her truck bed, and Devil's Thunder walked toward her like a trained dog. 35 years of planning had led to this moment, and Hank realized he wasn't looking at his daughter anymore. He was looking at his executioner. The halter slipped over Devil's Thunder's massive head like it had been made for him. Probably had been. Hank watched his daughter's practiced movements, the way her hands never shook, never hesitated. This wasn't the fumbling of someone handling a dangerous animal for the first time. This was routine, intimate even. "How many times?" Hank's voice barely carried across the morning air. "Every week for 35 years. Sarah secured the lead rope with movements that spoke of decades of repetition, rain or shine, sickness and health. While you were here drowning in self-pity, I was keeping your brother's last wish alive." The words hit him like physical blows. Danny's last wish. Not for Sarah to have a good life. Not for Hank to stay sober. Not for their mother to find peace. For this horse to live. Hank's legs nearly buckled as the full weight of it settled on him. He gripped the porch railing harder, feeling splinters bite into his palm. The pain was welcome. It meant this wasn't another whiskey dream. "Jesus, Sarah, you were 12. I was old enough to know right from wrong." Her eyes never left his face as she stroked the stallion's neck, old enough to know that heroes don't abandon their families when things get hard. Devil's Thunder stood perfectly still under her touch, his massive frame relaxed in a way that seemed impossible. This was the same animal that had hospitalized 6 riders before Danny, the same beast that had been deemed too dangerous to break, too wild to train, yet here he was, docile as a lamb under Sarah's care. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the failing sanctuary. Hank's 3 remaining rescue horses had ventured closer now, drawn by the presence of the magnificent stallion. Old Betsy, a 20-year-old mare with arthritis in her front legs, whickered softly. Thunder's ears pricked forward at the sound, and for a moment, Hank glimpsed something that might have been gentleness in those hellfire eyes. "He's beautiful," Hank whispered, hating himself for the admission. He always was. Sarah's voice carried a tenderness reserved only for the horse. Uncle Danny saw it. Even at the end, he saw past the wildness to what Thunder could become. Hank closed his eyes, remembering. Danny had always been the gentle one, the brother who could calm spooked horses with just his voice. Their father used to joke that Danny was born speaking horse instead of English. If anyone could have seen the potential in Devil's Thunder, it would have been Danny. "Where have you kept him all these years?" "The old Patterson place. Bought it when I was 25. Sarah ran her fingers through Thunder's mane, and the stallion leaned into her touch like an oversized dog. Fixed it up, built proper stables. Thunder's had everything he needed. Pasture, shelter, companionship when he wanted it. Solitude when he didn't. The Patterson Ranch. Hank knew it well. 1,500 acres of prime grazing land about 30 miles north. He'd driven past it countless times over the years, never knowing his daughter owned it, never knowing it housed the ghost that haunted his dreams. The expense, Hank started, was worth every penny. Sarah's jaw tightened. "Some things matter more than money, Daddy, though I don't expect you to understand that." Another cut, precise and deep. Hank had taught her to wield words like weapons, back when she was small enough to sit on his shoulders at county fairs. He'd been so proud of her sharp tongue then, her quick wit that could make rodeo cowboys twice her age laugh until they cried. Now that same sharpness was turned against him, and it cut deeper than any physical wound. Thunder shifted his weight, muscles rippling beneath his coat. Even at 38 years old, the stallion radiated power. Horses typically lived 25 to 30 years, but Thunder seemed to exist outside normal limitations, like his hatred had kept him strong, preserved him for this moment. "What do you want from me, Sarah?" Hank's voice came out rough with exhaustion. "You want me to apologize? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stay. I'm sorry I chose the bottle over my family. I'm sorry I let everyone down." "I don't want your apology." Sarah's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "I want justice. For Uncle Danny, for Mom, for every night I spent wondering if my father was dead in a ditch somewhere." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I want you to get on this horse, Daddy. 8 seconds. That's all. Just 8 seconds to prove you're still the man Uncle Danny believed you were." Thunder's head turned toward Hank then, and those ancient eyes seemed to burn straight through him. The stallion's nostrils flared, scenting something. Fear, guilt, the lingering ghost of whiskey from last night's bottle. Recognition flickered in those dark depths, and Hank realized the horse remembered him too. Remembered the day everything changed. Remembered the day Danny died. The morning wind picked up, rattling the loose barn siding and sending dust devils dancing across the dying pasture. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out, a lonely sound that seemed to echo the hollowness in Hank's chest. 8 seconds. Such a small number. In rodeo terms, it was eternity. In real life, it was nothing. In this moment, it felt like a lifetime. Hank stared at those burning eyes and felt something crack inside his chest. Not his ribs this time, but something deeper. The careful walls he'd built around that day in Cheyenne, brick by brick, bottle by bottle, began to crumble. "You don't understand," he whispered. "What really happened that day. I understand plenty." Sarah's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "I understand you let fear turn you into a coward." "No." The word came out stronger than Hank had spoken in years. Thunder's ears pricked forward at the sound, and for a moment the three of them existed in perfect tension, father, daughter, and the beast that bound them together in grief. Hank stepped down from the porch, his boots hitting the packed earth with finality. Each step toward the stallion felt like walking through quicksand, but he kept moving. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. She'd expected many reactions, but not this. "What really happened," Hank said, his voice growing steadier with each word, "was that Danny didn't draw Thunder by accident." The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's hand stilled on Thunder's neck, and the stallion's head lifted, as if sensing the shift in the very molecules around them. "What are you talking about?" But there was something in Sarah's voice now, uncertainty creeping around the edges of her carefully constructed rage. Hank reached into his shirt pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out a piece of paper, yellowed with age and worn soft from 3 decades of folding and unfolding. The letter had traveled with him from town to town, bottle to bottle, always pressed close to his heart like a talisman of pain. "Danny wrote this the night before Cheyenne. I found it in his gear bag after—" Hank's voice caught. "After they scraped him off the arena floor." Sarah's face had gone pale, but she didn't reach for the letter. Thunder stepped closer to Hank, his massive presence suddenly protective rather than threatening. The stallion's breath was warm against Hank's shoulder, carrying the scent of hay and something indefinably wild. "He knew," Hank continued, unfolding the paper with reverent care. "Danny knew what Thunder could do. He'd watched the other riders get carried out on stretchers. Hell, we all had. But he made a deal with the stock contractor anyway. Volunteered to draw Thunder in the final round. That's impossible." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "The draws are random. Everyone knows that." Hank's laugh was bitter as alkali water. "Nothing's random when money changes hands, sweetheart. Danny paid Jimmy Reeves $500, every penny he had, to make sure he got Thunder instead of me." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. In the distance, old Betsy whinnied softly, as if sensing the weight of secrets finally being dragged into the light. Thunder's dark eyes remained fixed on Hank, and for the first time in 35 years, Hank didn't see accusation in those depths. He saw understanding. "Read it." Hank held out the letter, his hand shaking. Read what your uncle really died for." Sarah took the paper like it might burn her fingers. Her eyes moved across the faded ink, and with each line, her carefully constructed worldview began to fracture. Hank knew the words by heart, had recited them drunk and sober, in flea-bag motels and beneath star-scattered skies. "Hank, if you're reading this, then thunder got the better of me. Don't blame yourself, brother. I know you think you're the stronger rider, and maybe you are, but strength isn't everything. That horse isn't just wild. He's broken, abused. I can see it in his eyes. Someone hurt him bad before he ever made it to the rodeo circuit. He doesn't trust humans, and he shouldn't. We've given him every reason to hate us. But here's the thing, I've been broken too. We all have. Maybe that's why I understand him. Maybe that's why I can help him find some peace. If this kills me, don't let them put him down. Promise me, Hank. He deserves a chance to heal, same as any of us. He just needs someone who speaks his language. Someone who knows what it's like to carry that much pain. Take care of Sarah and Mom. Tell them I love them. But save Thunder. He's not the monster everyone thinks he is. He's just a soul crying out for someone to see past the hurt to what he could become. Your brother, Danny." Sarah's hands trembled as she finished reading. The letter fluttered in the morning breeze, and tears she'd held back for 35 years finally spilled over. Thunder moved closer to her, his massive head lowering until his muzzle touched her shoulder, a gesture of comfort that spoke of deep understanding between them. "He saved me," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "But he was supposed to save you." The truth settled between them like dust after a storm. All these years, Sarah had believed she was honoring Danny's memory by keeping Thunder alive. She'd never known she was fulfilling his dying wish, a wish born not of random chance, but of deliberate sacrifice. Hank looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not his executioner but Danny's legacy given flesh. Thunder hadn't destroyed their family that day in Cheyenne. He'd revealed the depth of love one brother would sacrifice for another. And now, impossibly, all three of them stood together in the place where healing might finally begin. The moment stretched like a held breath until the sound of gravel crunching under tires shattered it completely. Sarah's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face instantly transforming into something harder, more guarded. Thunder's ears flattened against his skull, and the stallion's entire body went rigid with tension that hadn't been there seconds before. "Shit," Sarah breathed, quickly wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She moved to Thunder's other side, positioning herself between the horse and whoever was coming up the drive. Hank squinted through the morning haze at the approaching vehicle, a white Ford pickup with official Wyoming plates. His stomach dropped. Sheriff's Department. The truck pulled up beside Sarah's red pickup, and Deputy Marcus Webb stepped out, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. "Morning." Hank Webb's voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes immediately found Thunder and went wide. The deputy was maybe 35, young enough that he wouldn't remember Devil's Thunder from the rodeo days, but old enough to recognize danger when he saw it. "Got a call about some kind of disturbance out here." "No disturbance, Marcus." Hank kept his voice level, but inside, alarm bells were ringing. Who the hell had called the sheriff? And why now, when everything was finally starting to make sense? "Just visiting with my daughter?" Webb's gaze shifted between them, taking in Sarah's defensive posture and the way she kept one hand on Thunder's lead rope. The deputy had dealt with Hank's drunken episodes enough times over the years to know when something was off. "That's a hell of a horse you got there, Miss Morrison. Don't think I've seen him around before." "He's been boarded elsewhere," Sarah replied quickly. Too quickly. "I'm just bringing him by to see if Dad wants to take him on at the sanctuary." Webb nodded slowly, but Hank could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. The deputy pulled out a small notebook, flipping through pages with deliberate movements. "Funny thing. Got a call from Dr. Elizabeth Chen over at the university. Says she's been tracking illegal horse trafficking in the area. Mentioned something about rare bloodlines being moved without proper documentation." Sarah's face went pale again, but this time it wasn't from emotion. It was fear. Raw, undisguised fear that made Thunder sidestep nervously, picking up on her sudden tension. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice had lost its earlier conviction. "See, here's where it gets interesting." Webb flipped another page. "Dr. Chen's been researching the legendary broncs from the 80s. Devil's Thunder, Tornado Tom, Midnight Express. Real thorough woman, Dr. Chen. She's got DNA samples from their offspring, registration papers, the works. He looked up from his notebook, his eyes settling on Thunder with new understanding. She also knows that Devil's Thunder was supposed to have died 35 years ago. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Hank felt the world tilting sideways, just like it had that day in Cheyenne when everything went wrong. Sarah's carefully constructed plan was unraveling in real time, and there wasn't a damn thing any of them could do about it. Now, I'm not saying this is Devil's Thunder, Webb continued conversationally. That would be impossible, right? But Dr. Chen, she's real curious about any horses that might match his description. Seems there's some kind of federal investigation into forged death certificates for valuable breeding stock. Thunder snorted and pawed the ground, his massive hoof leaving a deep impression in the dirt. The stallion's head was high now, nostrils flaring as he scented something none of them could detect. Danger, maybe, or just the electric tension crackling between the humans around him. Marcus, Hank said carefully, whatever you think is going on here. I think, Webb interrupted, that we've got ourselves a situation that's way above my pay grade. I think there are people very interested in this horse, and they're not the kind of people you want to keep waiting. He closed his notebook with a sharp snap. I also think you folks better figure out your story real quick, because Dr. Chen is driving down from Laramie as we speak. Should be here within the hour. Sarah's hand tightened on the lead rope until her knuckles went white. Thunder felt her distress and moved closer, his massive body shielding her from the deputy's scrutiny. For 35 years she'd managed to keep this secret buried. Now it was all coming apart because of one curious academic with too much time and too many questions. How long have you known? Sarah asked quietly. Webb's expression softened slightly. Since this morning, when Dr. Chen called. But Hank's neighbors have been talking for weeks about strange lights on the property at night, expensive horse trailers coming and going. He looked directly at Hank. You're not exactly known for midnight visitors these days. The trap was closing around them, and Hank could feel it in his bones. 35 years of secrets, 35 years of carefully constructed lies, all crumbling because his daughter had finally decided it was time for reckoning. But now the reckoning would come from strangers, not family. And Thunder, magnificent Thunder, stood at the center of it all. Still wild, still dangerous, still carrying the weight of a dead man's final wish. The weight of Webb's words settled over them like a shroud. Hank watched his daughter's face cycle through emotions, fear, anger, desperation, and realized she was calculating. Even now, even with everything falling apart, Sarah was looking for an angle, a way out. She'd inherited more than just his stubbornness. She'd gotten his survivor's instinct, too. There's something else, Webb said, his voice dropping lower. He glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers, though the nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. Dr. Chen wasn't the only one asking questions. Got a call yesterday from some outfit called Meridian Holdings. They're offering a substantial reward for information about Thunder's whereabouts. Sarah's composure cracked completely. No, she breathed. They can't know. I was so careful. Who's Meridian Holdings? Hank interrupted, though something cold was already spreading through his chest. Corporate vultures had been circling the rodeo world for decades, buying up bloodlines, turning wild horses into investment portfolios. Genetic research company, Webb explained. They specialize in preserving rare equine DNA for future generations. Real fancy operation out of Colorado. They've been buying up champion bloodlines, especially the ones from Thunder's era. Thunder's entire body went rigid, every muscle coiled like a spring. The stallion's eyes rolled back, showing white, and he let out a sound Hank hadn't heard since Cheyenne, a scream of pure rage that echoed across the dying pasture. Sarah fought to control the lead rope as 1,200 pounds of fury strained against her grip. Easy, boy, she whispered, but her voice was shaking. Easy. Hank stepped closer, instinctively reaching toward the stallion, and Thunder's wild gaze fixed on him. In those dark depths, Hank saw something that made his blood run cold. This wasn't just animal panic, this was recognition. Terror born of experience. Sarah, Hank said slowly, never taking his eyes off Thunder. Where did Thunder come from? Before the rodeo circuit, I mean. Who owned him first? Her silence stretched too long. Webb's hand moved closer to his radio, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Thunder's breathing came in harsh bursts, foam specking his muzzle. "Tell me," Hank pressed. "What aren't you saying?" "I can't." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "I promised Uncle Danny I'd never—" "Danny's been dead for 35 years." The words exploded out of Hank with more force than he'd intended. Thunder reared slightly, and Sarah had to throw her full weight against the lead rope. "Whatever he made you promise, it doesn't matter now. They're coming for Thunder. These Meridian people, they're not going to just take him. They're going to dissect him, turn him into test tubes and frozen samples." Sarah looked at her father, and for a moment she wasn't a 40-year-old woman carrying decades of resentment. She was 8 years old again, seeking comfort after a nightmare. Uncle Danny found out about the experiments. That's why he had to save Thunder. That's why he knew he had to die. The morning sun dimmed behind a cloud, casting them all in shadow. Webb's radio crackled to life with dispatcher chatter, but he ignored it, leaning forward to catch Sarah's words. "What experiments?" Hank asked. Though part of him already knew the answer would destroy whatever piece he'd found in Danny's letter. Meridian Holdings used to be called something else. Mountain View Research. They had a facility outside Colorado Springs back in the 70s. Sarah's words came faster now, as if she needed to get them out before she lost her nerve. They were experimenting on horses, genetic manipulation, drug trials, behavioral conditioning. Thunder was one of their subjects. They called him Test Subject 47. The pieces clicked together in Hank's mind with sickening clarity. Thunder's impossible aggression, his supernatural strength, the way he seemed to exist outside normal limitations. The scars hidden beneath his coat weren't from rodeo injuries. They were from laboratories and needles and things no animal should ever endure. "Danny found out," Sarah continued, tears streaming down her face again. "He was dating a girl who worked there. She showed him the files, the photographs. What they did to those horses." She shuddered. "Most of them died. The ones that survived were turned into rodeo stock, sold off to hide the evidence." Thunder had gone perfectly still now, as if hearing his origin story had drained all the fight out of him. But his eyes remained alert, watching, waiting. A survivor's patience born of unimaginable suffering. "So, Danny volunteered to draw him," Hank said quietly. "Not to save me, to save Thunder. To give him one last moment of dignity before they destroyed him completely." Sarah wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Uncle Danny knew they'd put Thunder down after what happened in Cheyenne. But he also knew I'd be there, watching. He made me promise to find a way to save him, to give him the life he deserved. Webb's radio crackled again, and this time he answered it. His face went grim as he listened to the tinny voice on the other end. "Dr. Chen's about 10 minutes out," he said, "and there's a convoy of black SUVs following her." Thunder lifted his magnificent head toward the horizon, ears pricked forward. Somewhere in the distance, Hank could hear the faint rumble of engines. The reckoning was coming whether they were ready or not. The rumble of engines grew louder, but Hank barely heard it. His mind was reeling backward through 35 years of carefully constructed grief, every memory suddenly taking on a different shape. Danny's nervous energy before the Cheyenne rodeo, the way he'd avoided Hank's eyes during their last conversation. The strange phone calls Danny had been making in the weeks leading up to that final ride. "Jesus Christ," Hank whispered, staggering backward until his shoulders hit the barn wall. You both knew what Thunder was before Cheyenne, and you never told me." Sarah's face crumpled, but she didn't deny it. Thunder stepped closer to her, his massive head lowering protectively over her shoulder, a gesture that spoke of years of shared secrets. "Danny made me swear," she said through fresh tears. "He said if you knew the truth, you'd try to save Thunder yourself, and you were the better rider, Dad. You would have stayed on. You would have won. That would have been bad because..." But even as Hank asked the question, the answer was crystallizing in his mind like ice forming on glass. "Because winners don't disappear," Sarah said quietly. "Champions get studied, documented, followed. If you'd conquered Devil's Thunder, if you'd been the man who finally broke the unbreakable horse, Meridian would have found him within weeks. they would have found you. The truth hit Hank like a physical blow. Danny hadn't just died to save Thunder. He died to save his older brother from a lifetime of running, from a lifetime of looking over his shoulder, waiting for corporate vultures to come collect their lost property. All these years, Hank said, his voice barely audible, I thought I'd failed him. I thought if I'd been stronger, faster, better. You thought like a cowboy, Sarah interrupted. Danny thought like someone who'd seen the files, who knew what happened to the horses who survived those experiments. She gestured toward Thunder, and for the first time Hank really looked at the stallion, saw past the magnificent exterior to the scars Sarah had mentioned, the too bright intelligence in those dark eyes, the way Thunder held himself like something that had learned to expect pain from human hands. Webb's radio squawked again. Deputy Webb, those vehicles are turning onto Morrison's Drive now. ETA 3 minutes. Copy that. Webb clipped the radio back to his belt and looked at them with something approaching sympathy. Folks, I need to know right now, is there anything illegal happening here? Because once those federal people arrive, this becomes their show, and I can't protect anybody. Sarah met her father's eyes across the space between them, and in that moment, Hank saw himself as he'd been at 25. Fierce, protective, willing to die for the things he loved. She'd spent 35 years believing he'd abandoned her, when in truth she'd been living the life Danny died to give her. A life where she could save Thunder without anyone knowing. A life where she could heal the broken horse her uncle had sacrificed everything to protect. But there had been a cost. There was always a cost. Sarah, Hank said slowly, what did you think would happen when you brought Thunder here? What was the end game? Her laugh was bitter, empty. I wanted you to see him, to understand what Uncle Danny died for, to know that your little brother's death meant something. Her voice turned sharp, cutting. I wanted you to realize you weren't the center of everyone else's universe, that maybe, just maybe, some things were more important than your guilt. There it was, the revelation that reframed everything, not just the past hour, but decades of self-imposed exile. Sarah hadn't brought Thunder here for revenge. She'd brought him here for truth. She was tired of carrying Danny's secret alone, tired of watching her father drown in misplaced guilt, while Thunder aged in hidden pastures, waiting for a reckoning that might never come. The sound of car doors slamming echoed across the property. Thunder's head shot up, nostrils flaring, and the stallion let out another one of those bone-chilling screams. But this time, Hank heard something different in it. Not rage, recognition. How long? Hank asked quietly. How long have they been looking for him? Since the day he was supposed to die, Sarah replied. Meridian never stopped believing he survived Cheyenne. They've been patient, methodical, buying up properties, tracking bloodlines, following paper trails. She looked at her father with eyes that held too much knowledge. They found me 6 months ago, offered me more money than you could imagine. The pieces clicked into place with sickening finality. And you brought Thunder here because they're coming either way, Sarah said simply. At least this way, he gets to choose his last stand. The weight of Sarah's words settled between them like dust after a gunshot. Hank stared at his daughter, seeing for the first time the woman she'd become in his absence, someone who'd learned to make impossible choices with the same cold precision that had once made him a champion rider. You used yourself as bait, he said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. You let them find you. Sarah nodded, her grip tightening on Thunder's lead rope as voices carried across the morning air. Professional, clipped voices that spoke of corporate efficiency and federal authority. They were getting close anyway, following the money trail from the boarding facilities, cross-referencing veterinary records. It was only a matter of time. Thunder's ears swiveled toward the approaching sounds, his massive frame tensing like a coiled spring. The stallion had heard these kinds of voices before, Hank realized, in sterile rooms with fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic, in places where horses were reduced to numbers and genetic sequences. Jesus, Sarah. Hank pushed off from the barn wall, his legs unsteady. Why didn't you just disappear, take Thunder somewhere they'd never find you? Her laugh was sharp, bitter. Where? They own half the horse properties in 3 states. They have surveillance, private investigators, government contracts. She gestured toward the approaching convoy. You can't outrun that kind of money forever. And Thunder, she looked at the stallion with infinite sadness. He's 38 years old, Dad. Even with all their experiments, even with whatever they did to make him stronger, he's not immortal. He deserves better than spending his last years running. Webb stepped closer, his hand resting on his radio. Folks, I need to know what you want me to tell them, because in about 60 seconds, this becomes a whole different conversation. Thunder suddenly lifted his head, nostrils flaring wide. His eyes fixed on the horizon where dust clouds marked the approaching vehicles, and the sound that emerged from his throat was unlike anything Hank had ever heard. Not a scream of rage or fear, but something deeper. Recognition mixed with resignation. The sound of a warrior acknowledging his final battle. He knows, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. God help us, he remembers them. The convoy crested the hill, 3 black SUVs followed by a white van with tinted windows. They moved with the coordinated precision of a military operation, which Hank supposed it was. 35 years of searching, of following cold trails and dead ends, had led them here, to his failing sanctuary, to his estranged daughter, to the horse that had destroyed his life and apparently made hers possible. Sarah, Hank said urgently, there's still time. Take Thunder and run. I'll tell them. No. Her voice carried a finality that reminded him painfully of Danny. I'm done running. I'm done carrying this alone. She turned to face him fully, and in her eyes he saw not the scared 8-year-old who'd watched her uncle die, but the woman who'd spent decades honoring a dying man's promise. Uncle Danny saved him once. Now it's our turn. The lead SUV pulled into the yard, gravel crunching under expensive tires. Through the windshield, Hank could see figures in dark suits, faces obscured by sunglasses despite the overcast morning. Professional, cold, the kind of people who saw horses as assets and human grief as acceptable collateral damage. Thunder pawed the ground, his massive hoof leaving deep gouges in the dirt. Every muscle in the stallion's body was coiled tight, ready for violence or flight. But he stayed close to Sarah, protective even in his fear. 35 years of trust, Hank realized. 35 years of her proving that not all humans meant harm. Whatever happens, Sarah said quietly. Her words meant for both Hank and the stallion. He's not going back to a laboratory. Not alive. The weight of that statement hung in the air between them as car doors began opening. Hank looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw the steel backbone that had allowed her to carry Danny's secret all these years, the same backbone that was about to make her choose Thunder's death over his captivity. There might be another way, Hank said, though he wasn't sure what that way might be. All he knew was that 35 years of guilt and self-imposed exile had led to this moment. His brother had died believing sacrifice could save the things worth saving. Now it was time to find out if he'd been right. Thunder's scream split the morning air again, raw and defiant. But this time, Hank heard something else in it. Not just recognition or rage, but expectation. The stallion was waiting to see what the humans who claimed to love him would actually do when the moment of choice arrived, the moment Danny had died for, the moment Sarah had orchestrated, the moment Hank could no longer avoid. The first person out of the lead SUV was a woman in her 50s, silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her movements carrying the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Hank made in 6 months, and when she removed her sunglasses, her eyes were the color of winter ice. "Mr. Morrison," she called across the yard, her voice carrying despite the distance. "I'm Dr. Victoria Ashford, CEO of Meridian Holdings. I believe you have something that belongs to us." Thunder's response was immediate and volcanic. The stallion reared up, striking at the air with hooves that could crush a man's skull, his scream of rage echoing off the mountains. Sarah held onto the lead rope with desperate strength, her boots sliding in the dirt as 1,200 pounds of fury strained against her grip. "Easy," she whispered, but her voice was shaking. "I'm here. I'm still here." More figures emerged from the vehicles, men in tactical gear, a veterinarian with a tranquilizer gun, technicians wheeling equipment that looked more suited to a surgical suite than a horse rescue. They moved with practiced coordination, forming a loose perimeter around the barn while maintaining careful distance from Thunder's reach. "That's close enough," Hank said, his voice carrying across the yard, with the authority of a man who'd spent decades controlling dangerous animals. To his surprise, they stopped. "Whatever you think you're here for, we can discuss it without surrounding us like common criminals." Dr. Ashford smiled, the expression holding no warmth. "Test subject 47 has been missing from our research facility for 36 years, Mr. Morrison. That makes this a recovery operation, not a negotiation." "His name is Thunder," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "And he's not your subject anymore. He hasn't been since my uncle died saving him." "Ah, yes, Daniel Morrison." Dr. Ashford consulted a tablet one of her assistants handed her. "Died in Cheyenne, 1987. Tragic accident." Her eyes lifted to meet Sarah's. "Except it wasn't an accident, was it? Your uncle knew exactly what he was doing when he volunteered to ride our horse. He understood that certain modifications made Thunder unsuitable for continued testing." Thunder's breathing came in harsh bursts, foam specking his muzzle. But his eyes never left Dr. Ashford, and Hank saw in them the same recognition that had terrified him earlier. This woman, or someone like her, had been in those sterile rooms, had given orders that turned a magnificent animal into something that existed beyond normal limits. "What modifications?" Hank asked, though part of him didn't want to know. "Genetic therapy, primarily. Enhanced muscle development, increased bone density, modifications to the nervous system that enhanced both intelligence and aggression." Dr. Ashford spoke with clinical detachment, as if describing improvements to farm equipment. "Thunder represented the pinnacle of our work, the perfect fusion of natural ability and scientific enhancement." "You tortured him," Sarah said flatly. "We evolved him." Dr. Ashford's voice hardened. "Do you have any idea what his genetic material is worth? What we could accomplish with modern technology and his DNA?" Thunder suddenly went perfectly still, his wild energy condensing into something that felt far more dangerous. The stallion's gaze fixed on Dr. Ashford with an intensity that made even the tactical team take an involuntary step backward. "Sarah," Hank said quietly, a plan crystallizing in his mind with the clarity that had once made him champion. "Let go of the rope." "Dad, no. If I let him go, trust me." He stepped closer to Thunder, his movements slow and deliberate. 35 years ago, your uncle died believing some things were worth saving. Today, I'm going to find out if he was right." Dr. Ashford raised a hand, and Hank heard the distinct sound of safeties being switched off. "Mr. Morrison, any attempt to interfere with this recovery will be met with appropriate force." Hank reached for Thunder's halter, his weathered hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. The stallion's dark eyes met his, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. He was 25 again, fearless and unbroken, facing down the impossible. Thunder was the magnificent, tortured creature Danny had died to save, and between them stretched 35 years of guilt and grief and the desperate hope that love could still triumph over money. "Easy, boy," Hank whispered, his fingers finding the halter's buckle. Time to show them what Danny's sacrifice really meant. Thunder's muscles coiled beneath his scarred hide, power building like a storm preparing to break. Sarah released the lead rope, tears streaming down her face as she stepped back. Webb's hand moved to his weapon, caught between duty and conscience, and Dr. Ashford smiled, mistaking Hank's intention for surrender. She had no idea she was watching the last free moment of the last wild horse, or that Hank Morrison was about to give Devil's Thunder something worth more than genetic material or corporate profits. He was about to give him choice. Hank's fingers worked the halter buckle with the same steady precision that had once made him legendary. The leather straps fell away like shackles, and for one heartbeat that stretched into eternity, Thunder stood perfectly still, a creature caught between captivity and freedom, between the sterile hell of his past and the vast Wyoming sky above. Then, the stallion exploded into motion. Not toward Dr. Ashford and her team as they'd expected, not in blind rage or desperate flight. Instead, Thunder wheeled toward the open pasture, his hooves thundering against the earth in a rhythm that spoke of pure, undiluted freedom. He was magnificent, 38 years old and moving like liquid lightning, every enhanced muscle working in perfect harmony as he stretched into a gallop that defied the laws of nature and time. The tactical team raised their weapons, but Dr. Ashford's sharp command stopped them. "Hold fire! We need him alive!" But Thunder was already beyond their reach, racing toward the horizon with a speed that seemed impossible for any earthbound creature. His mane streamed behind him like a war banner, and his scream of liberation echoed off the mountains. Not rage now, but joy. Pure, untainted joy at feeling wind and space and the choice to run. "Beautiful," Webb whispered, his hand falling away from his weapon. "Jesus Christ, look at him go!" Dr. Ashford was screaming orders, sending her team scrambling back to the vehicles. The white van's engine roared to life, but Thunder had already crested the first hill, disappearing into the maze of arroyos and pine groves that stretched toward the mountains. 35 years of exploring every hidden trail with Sarah had taught him these hills better than any GPS could map them. Hank felt Sarah's hand slip into his, her fingers strong and steady. "He won't let them take him," she said quietly. "Uncle Danny made sure of that too." "What do you mean?" Sarah's smile held the same sad pride Hank remembered from Danny's face the morning he'd left for Cheyenne. "There's a place up in the high country, a box canyon with walls too steep for vehicles, too narrow for helicopters. Danny and I found it when I was 12. If Thunder can't stay free." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The search lasted 3 days. Helicopters buzzed over the mountains like angry wasps, their rotors churning the autumn air. Ground teams with tracking equipment combed every trail and ravine. Dr. Ashford's operation expanded to include state wildlife officials, federal agents, and enough technology to find a needle in a haystack. They found nothing. On the morning of the 4th day, Hank stood on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching the last helicopter bank away toward the south. The mountains looked peaceful again, draped in golden aspen and crowned with early snow. Somewhere up there, Thunder was either running free or had chosen his own ending on his own terms. Either way, it was more than Meridian had ever given him. Sarah emerged from the house carrying her own coffee, her face calm in a way Hank hadn't seen since she was 8 years old. They'd spent the past 3 days talking, really talking, for the first time in 30 years. About Danny, about the choices that had shaped their lives, about the guilt they'd both carried, and the different ways they'd chosen to honor the dead. "No regrets?" Hank asked. "None." Sarah settled into the chair beside him, the same chair Danny used to occupy during his visits. He got what Uncle Danny died to give him, the right to choose. A month later, the failing Morrison Horse Sanctuary became the Daniel Morrison Wildlife Preserve, funded by an anonymous donation that arrived the day after Dr. Ashford's team departed. The amount was exactly what Meridian had offered Sarah for Thunder, money she'd apparently never intended to keep. Hank hired 3 full-time staff members and built new facilities for the rescued horses that arrived weekly. He stopped drinking, started sleeping through the night, began to understand the difference between penance and purpose. Sarah moved back from Colorado, taking over the preserve's daily operations, while Hank focused on the horses that needed gentle hands and patient hearts to heal. She never spoke about Thunder's fate, and he never asked. Some questions were better left to the mountains and the wind. But sometimes, on clear autumn mornings when the light hit the high country just right, Hank would catch a glimpse of movement among the distant peaks. A flash of dark hide, a glint of silver mane, the phantom echo of hoofbeats carried on the mountain air. It might have been elk, might have been shadows and wishful thinking. Or it might have been the last wild horse, running free in country that remembered when freedom mattered more than money, when sacrifice meant something beyond corporate profit margins. Either way, Danny would have approved, and some things, Hank had finally learned, were worth more than knowing.